Right, so it has perhaps been somewhat surprising that a story concerning the resignation of Labour councillors has garnered some mainstream media attention, though even when they do cover something like this, they still can't be completely honest in their reporting. Certainly when Labour were in opposition and councillors across the country were quitting, they didn't bat much of an eyelid. But now Starmer is the PM, and his rancid perversion of what Labour once was or in power, all of a sudden something like this makes the news. But everything that has happened in Broxtowe in particular goes back a while now. How Starmer has torn what was once one of the staunchest, most successful Labour areas with one of the most community-involved local parties going in the country, real socialism in action at community level, and it's a story reflected in so many other places around the country as well. This is actually a story of exactly how Keir Starmer gutted the Labour Party nationwide, poisoned it, destroyed it, and everything it actually stood for, so he could be a pale and stale Tory tribute act and offer nothing to the country anymore at all. So let me tell you the real tale of Broxtowe. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Right, so 20 Labour councillors have resigned en masse from Broxtowe Borough Council in Nottinghamshire, and it's made headline news. But truth be told, this is a story that goes back much further than this move in the here and now, which mainstream media have latched onto for a quick headline in what is basically a quiet period in the news cycle with Parliament still closed. But even in the more government-centric outlets couldn't be completely straight with people. Labour only had 26 councillors anyway on Broxtowe Borough Council, so with 20 having quit, including the council leader no less, Labour have also lost control of the council, putting them in third place on it now behind the Tories, with this new 20-strong group, the Broxtowe Independents, now taking over the council and no longer accepting the diktat of Keir Starmer. Here's their resignation letter spelling out exactly why they've done this. Today, 20 Broxtowe Labour councillors with a combined membership of 250 years have said enough is enough. Together with one county councillor and 100 members, we're walking away from the party we have always served and supported. It is with a heavy heart that we can no longer be in a party that has abandoned traditional Labour values under Keir Starmer's leadership. From the cutting of the winter fuel allowance for 11 million pensioners, to the retention of the two-child benefit cap for struggling families, the increase in bus fares across our towns and cities, the betrayal of waspy women pensioners, to a tepid response to the genocide in Gaza. We say this is not the Labour Party we campaigned for. Nor is it the Labour Party that Keir Starmer promised. The public were told to vote for change, and all they got was more of the same, attacking the most vulnerable to protect the interests of the rich and powerful. In Broxtowe, we urged the party to rethink the winter fuel allowance, which affected our local residents. The response? To callously block 10 of our councillors as county council candidates for the local elections in May 2025. We will not stand by and let down the people of Broxtowe and defend the indefensible. We cannot just sit back in silence. Our constituents need hope and councillors who will place our people and community first. This can only be realised by standing up to and offering people a real choice. Therefore, we are proud to announce that 20 of our councillors are forming a new independent party, a party that will always prioritise the needs of everyone in our community. We will be standing our candidates in the May 2025 local elections and will campaign for every vote, in every street, in every town. We will continue to build new council houses for veterans and those most in need. We will continue to drive ambitious climate targets and protect our environment. We will continue with our plans to build new leisure centres and protect our cultural heritage. That's the promise we have made to you as councillors, and that is a promise we will continue to make into the future. Starmer's Labour is one of do as you're told, your views are unwelcome otherwise. To ask your own party not to push ahead with the winter fuel allowance cut, as temperatures notably plunge across the country this week, even down here in West Cornwall, we were in minus temperatures this morning, and actually punish councillors for daring to even ask, stripping them of their selections to stand for county council for daring to ask, to punish them for daring to ask. It's an abomination. But this also isn't a first for Broxtowe, as I'll come on to. Of course, the pliant mainstream media have been their typically dishonest selves even when they have actually covered this story. 3 of the worst have been the BBC, Sky News and The Guardian. No particular surprises there. In each case telling a story of resignations due to Starmer's policies or Starmer's leadership. Each of them intentionally omitting to mention Gaza as a factor, because even where the government of the day has nowhere to go, And when there is no positive spin for the mainstream to put on this story, they'll simply leave out what for many people will be one of the worst and most harmful aspects. And they've got no excuses. They will have seen the full resignation letter of these 20 Broxtowe councillors as much as I have. Stripping candidates of their selections, imposing diktat. This has been a feature in Broxtowe Labour Party politics for years now, under Starmer's leadership. And equally, when we consider Starmer-friendly yes-men being parachuted into candidacies for Parliament, notably across the country, the story of Broxtowe is one that will be repeated all over the country, and many other constituencies will find similarities in the tale I have to tell. Much of this stems from those same parliamentary selections being conducted. Where Keir Starmer promised local parties they could choose their own candidates, he didn't tell them that the shortlist would be settled by him and his backers. So the only choice presented to local parties was from an array of Starmer-approved no-marks. This went down particularly badly in Broxtowe because in 2017 and 2019 they'd made significant inroads into the Tory vote under their chosen candidate Greg Marshall. Broxtowe being the former seat of former Tory rent-a-gob Anna Soubry before she toddled off to Change UK along with several of the most rancid members of the Labour right, showing there really is sod all in it between the two parties along certain factional lines. Marshall, unfortunately for him, dared to be a socialist in a socialist democratic party, or at least it was until Starmer got there, because socialism brings him out in a nasty rash, it would appear, and on that basis Marshall clearly had to go, no matter how much he'd been eating into that Tory vote. Even right-wing trade unions were up in arms about Greg Marshall being found unsuitable to be the Labour candidate for Broxtowe by the newly right-wing heavy Labour NEC. People who went on to award themselves all manner of safe seats in Parliament, of course, because Greg Marshall was the real deal. This is a guy who ran food parcel deliveries to vulnerable people during the pandemic. He organised volunteers to increase the capacity of that service and scope of that work. Community organising in Broxtowe had actually won them national recognition, the so-called Broxtowe model, as it became known as, delivering for communities, Labour being at the heart of the community, actually running a shop and office in the town, a hub, so they were always visible, always present, not just appearing every 5 years to ask you for your vote. As a candidate, Greg Marshall was the sort of man Labour should have been snapping the hand off to represent them, but instead he was dumped because he wasn't Starmery enough. It didn't matter that Marshall was at every meeting for Labour, at every canvass event for Labour. It is Starmer's party now, his Labour Party, as he incessantly calls it, when it has always been about collectivism. But again, that's another word that would bring Starmer out in hives, I'm sure. Marshall was ditched. Broxtowe was presented with a shortlist of 3, including one candidate who had already been ditched by the people of High Peak in Derbyshire and who worked in London for the Tony Blair Institute. The other 2 were again another candidate from London, and the third candidate was a mate of the regional director. It was a sham. Well, by this point, the local Labour Party in Broxtowe were having none of it. First, the selection committee, upon hearing of this rigging, resigned entirely from the selection process. They issued a statement saying the constituency party has been sidelined throughout the entire process, and their choice of candidates had clearly been rigged to suit the leadership's preference. This was unfair. It ran completely contrary to the principle of democracy, especially within the Labour Party. London-based officials sidelined Broxtowe Labour, sidelined those members and decided for themselves who was worthy of representing Broxtowe constituents rather than the people who actually live there and do all the canvassing there. Things only escalated from there. Later the same day, the entire executive from Broxtowe CLP resigned, stating that as a result of the undemocratic decision by the NEC to exclude the only local candidate from the Broxtowe long list, Marshall, instead of leaving them with 3 out-of-area contenders, they were resigning as the CLP Executive Committee, thus leaving nobody to run the local party anymore. Nobody else would step up to take those places, scab effectively as that would have been, not even right-wingers in Broxtowe, appalled at the blatant abuse of party systems, of party democracy, and it stayed like that for 6 months. The selected Labour candidate in the end was the other London figure, Juliet Campbell. She's now the MP for Broxtowe, largely invisible, but Starmer doesn't care. He got a pliant MP who will do as he says. Who cares if she doesn't do what the people of Broxtowe want? And that is all that matters to him. Upon her selection, the floor of the CLP apparently was left littered with cut-up remnants of membership cards. Campbell, of course, went on to win the seat in the general election based on that Labour landslide that we saw happen around the country in July, that anti-Tory vote, because nobody in Broxtowe would actually go out campaigning with her. At this point, it's worth coming back to that shop the CLP ran in Broxtowe, the hub there, because Starmer dismissing candidates for daring to question the winter fuel allowance cut isn't the first time he's imposed his dictatorial tendencies on this CLP. You see, before resigning en masse, as Broxtowe CLP had done, the Broxtowe model, that community hub, the community organising, the presence in Broxtowe society Labour had effectively been rendered inoperable by Starmer and his regime. You see, the local Labour Party, they're organised out of that community hub. It was their connection to the community. It had been operating successfully since 2018, and we're at 2023 by this point. However, because it is party affiliated, the monies raised by them were the property of the party itself, and Starmer and co made a grab for it. As the local CLP refused to run it, the National Party seized control of that community hub, operating out of the Labour Party shop, and proceeded to lock all members and former officers out of the bank accounts, which contained raised funds of some £11,000 to be used locally in the community, as well as pay the rent and bills on the Labour Party shop itself. Starmer's lot literally shut down their own shop, their own party connection to the community in Broxtowe, for no other reason it can be seen except to continue to attack local Labour Party members for not doing as ordered. Not only was this shop the visible high street presence for the local Labour Party, it also contained a clothes bank that is now shut, as well as a food larder that fed more than 10,000 people during the pandemic, led by Greg Marshall as that operation was. It's very difficult to get inside the mind of the kind of organisation that does something like that to their own supporters, purely out of spite, that they have such a hatred for the poor and vulnerable these facilities were helping. So Keir Starmer rides again. It isn't even the first time Labour under Starmer were caught out for withholding funds out of spite either, because Bath CLP, which is one of the richest in the country, who have assets of some £1.3 million, were blocked from giving a comparatively paltry £3,600 to local food banks, children's charities, and a centre of the homeless by the National Party. If you're vulnerable, the Labour leadership appear to absolutely sodding hate you. And that should be blatantly obvious now they are in power with what they've been doing since. But the signs were there years ago. And not nearly enough was made of it then in the media when something could have been done about it. And what we're seeing now from Labour could have been potentially headed off. And if you want one more reason why Labour clearly hates socialists, and hate Broxtowe particularly, then try this. A local Broxtowe councillor wrote to the regional office asking for sufficient funds following being locked out of those accounts in order to purchase a funeral wreath for Broxtowe Labour's oldest member, a chap called Dave, who had passed away at the age of 92, who had been a member of the Labour Party for 70 years and even went canvassing for the party on his 90th birthday. Labour's regional office couldn't even be bothered to reply to the email, let alone release any funds. If this is how Starmer treats his own members through his authoritarianism, his control freakery, his diktat, his petty vengefulness, if he and his ilk don't get their own way, if this is how they treat their activists, their canvassers, their volunteers, their councillors, is it any wonder he's now ruining the country in the way he is now? And is it any wonder so many elected officials in Broxtowe and elsewhere have now had enough of the noxious organisation the Labour Party has become? What's the point of Labour winning to get the Tories out if they're actively working to undermine the good work of local members in their communities just like the Tories did? What makes them any different in which case? Well, we now know they really aren't any different, don't we? Solidarity to the 20 Broxtowe independents. Here's hoping the May local elections sees them re-elected to genuinely serve the people of Broxtowe, and not Labour, who have frankly treated the place like dirt. The May local elections are already looking like they could be an absolute nightmare for Keir Starmer, and deservedly so too. The only way we can hurt him is at the ballot box. So little wonder the little control freak is already trying to delay as many of these elections as possible, knowing he's going to get a rinsing. Proof as if we need it has already been presenting itself as by-elections triggered by councillors becoming MPs have already seen Labour losses mounting up at council level. I've covered many of these results since July. Here's one as a video recommendation as your suggested next watch to see just how much strife Starmer's Labour is deservedly in. Please do hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so to make sure you don't miss new daily content and help support the channel. It is very much appreciated, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.